Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the Thursday episode of the 905 Roundup. Today is going to be a short but impactful episode. We just have two big stories we want to talk to you about today, focusing on council candidate ethics and tawdry news, not so much. Well, we'll see. Roland, what do you got for us?
Well, I thought we'd start off with just a link that a listener sent me today, a really interesting link, and I thank them for forwarding it to me. But I thought it was worth talking about, not necessarily for the reason that that would immediately seem to be the reason. To clarify that terrible sentence, there have been some things on social media and a couple of complaints, one of which got as far as the city clerk about Paul Sharman, who's the councillor for Ward 5 in Burlington. He's been, I think this is his fourth term he's going for. There was something, so the first story that came up and got into one of the Burlington websites was, or the Burlington Gazette, I think it was about kind of providing incentives to people to take a lawn sign, and the clerk sort of looked at that and said, "Yeah, that's actually perfectly legal. You can do that." And it's certainly odd, a little bit unusual, but just on that one, and we'll come back to it. But I haven't heard of anybody doing that before. But I have heard of people paying for lawn signs. I've heard of people paying for signs at bus shelters. I've heard of people paying for all kinds of advertising. It's paying for advertising. That's legal. You're allowed to do that. It's a big part of any campaign. So although it's unusual, it's like, to say, oh my God, he's paying for people to put lawn signs on his lawn. Yeah, so what? The bigger one was something on an article that was on the, if I can just bring it up,
the Burlington, Ontario Reddit subreddit.
Reddit, yeah. I always forget the name of Reddit because I'm so in touch with social media and such that Reddit is for old guys, and I never look at it. No, that's not true. Accusing Paul Sharman of really using the words corruption and dirty politics and blah blah blah. And I looked at it and it's like, yeah, that's really Let's start from this point. I've known Paul Sharman for quite a long time, since before he was a councillor. I worked with him on the Shape Burlington committee. And I think it's fair to say that we are very different people. Although we may have somewhat similar accents, we take a very different view of the world. He is fairly small C, sometimes big C conservative. I am not. He is very I think fiscal conservative really could be his middle name. When it's about looking after the purse strings or whatever, I think he would say, I think I'm being fair to him to say that is what he would always talk about. And I'm, he would probably describe me as a bleeding heart, liberal, lefty, useless, weak-kneed, whatever. And that's fair enough, as a fair point. He could be right. I certainly am I'm of the centre left to left, depending on which day of the week it is and how I'm feeling. So I'm not defending Paul Sharman because I agree with him. I'm defending him kind of because of how often I disagree with him, and that I think if we're gonna go after a politician, you need to go after them with stuff that's actually honest and based on facts. Now, the story is about Paul Sharman accepting donations from a large number of developers over the years. It's like, yep, he does. He, like thousands and thousands of well, I'm going to guess thousands of councillors and candidates across Ontario right now, will be accepting checks from developers, personal checks, not corporate checks. And that is 100% legal for them to do. They are allowed to do it. It's legal. They're allowed, just as they're allowed to take a check from any business owner, as long as it's a personal check. From any union member or union leader, as long as it's a personal check. That's always been the case. Now, I think it's a huge problem that money from developers plays a vastly disproportionate role in elections. I think that's a huge problem. When I ran, I wouldn't take money from developers, whether personal was the only way. But if I thought a check was coming from a developer, they never tried to donate to me. Just make that clear. None of them wanted me. But if one had, I wouldn't have accepted it. That's my personal choice. Paul Sharman is one thing we cannot say about Paul Sharman is that he's a hypocrite. He's not portraying himself as a champion of opponents to development and then taking checks from them. No, Paul Sharman has been very consistent over his career. He's one of the guys who who's been pretty supportive of, more than pretty supportive of development downtown, pretty supportive of development in many places. Who was very, I've been at council meetings where Paul Sharman was extremely critical of people who were opposing high-rises in downtown Burlington. He called them entitled, he called them one-percenters, and I was like, wow, really? That's kind of crazy. But again, that's his opinion, and he's entitled to it, and there's nothing corrupt about it whatsoever. And the one thing I'll say for Paul Sharman that I think I've learned over the years is the guy will say what he thinks. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He will say it out loud. And if he offends you, he doesn't really care. And there's something to be said for that, I will say. That's not a common political attribute. So I'm not going to bat for the guy. I still disagree with 99% of the things. I'm just not the kind of person who's really going to ever be in Team Paul. But when it comes to if we're going to go after people, go after him after what he's actually said. Go after the fact that he called residents of Burlington a bunch of entitled one-percenters. I mean, I did, and that's a fair thing to go after him on because that's a dumb thing to say.
Well, I mean, when I read the article after you sent it to me, and I was going through it, and I get the person who wrote it. It is not a Paul Sharman fan, very clearly, but what strikes me is that it strikes me as a misunderstanding of how politics works. Money's there, money is just, it's part of politics. It will be for the foreseeable future until we actually want meaningful reform to our system, and that's going to mean public tax dollars involved in the system in some way. We've talked about the city, instead of permitting bus ads or whatnot, you say no, everyone gets a flyer mailed to them, like a catalog of every candidate in your ward, every candidate you're eligible to vote for, and you do their platform, and they can take with that, and you get it, and you can take that to the polls. Paul, we've had Paul on the podcast before. Paul struck me as very well knowledged on the subjects, on the topics. Like he's not a fool by any standard. We probably don't agree with him on a few policy decisions, but he is entitled to those decisions as well. He is very transparent on the fact that he is pro-development. So it should be no surprise that developers say, hey, can I cut you a check? To say that that's a sign of corruption, no, if anything, that's an honest politician. That's the definition of an honest politician.
These checks are all going to, the reason that Paul's getting this stick and not some of the other councillors, who I can tell you right now, if they haven't already taken checks from developers, then they probably will do. And some of them won't. Like, Marianne Ward has always said, I'm not going to take money from developers. And boy, she couldn't do. If she did, she would be a huge hypocrite. She won't do, and she hasn't. And they wouldn't want to give it to her because, she's kind of the enemy, right? Paul's kind of the person who's more on the side of the angels as far as they're concerned. Mm-hmm. There are, I would say, amongst the new crop of councillors, I would predict one or two of them will be taking donations from developers right now. I could be wrong. I don't know. But the thing is, we won't know for a few months until their accounts are put in.
Right.
Paul Sharma's accounts are audited from three previous elections, 4 elections, I forget how many. So his accounts are there. If you went through the accounts of every other councillor, with the exception of Marianne Mead Ward, before 2018, I would predict that you would see exactly the same donations. Certainly Jack Dennison, certainly... Well, I'm not going to name names, but I mean, the traditionally every councillor in Ontario has had a warm relationship with developers. Is that wrong? Is that regrettable? Is that problematic? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not corrupt. I mean, it's not under a strict legal definition of the word. It's not corruption. It's completely legal.
I think we're getting too much into the weeds on this one. It's not just developers. It's the fact that you accept money from people who will give money to you. So do you make the assumption that that person is therefore indebted to whoever gave the money? Now, if you're okay with, the little sweet little old lady who can only give $50 to a campaign, and that's who candidate X or candidate Y is indebted to getting them elected, so be it. That's a nice, fun, cozy story. Here's the thing: they're still indebted to them. They're still that's like you can't have it both ways. Money is involved in our political system, not just at the municipal, but all the way up through provincial and definitely at the federal level as well. This is what it brings down to. Now, you can dislike Paul Sharman because of his policies. You can say, I want somebody who's a little less development friendly to represent Ward 5 around the table, as well as you can for any other municipal election. You can say, well, I don't like this candidate's pro-development or anti-development stance. Don't start finding there's no gravy here when you're scraping the candidate donation list and find out, people who like what he has to say gave him money. That's not a scandal, and it's not a sign of corruption, and it makes our politics dirtier. It really
does.
It makes our politics so that we can't have an honest discussion about development. Because here's the thing: Paul Sharman might have a good point on some things. We do need intensification. Now, how that intensification shapes, that is a nuanced discussion. But we can't have a nuanced discussion if we're going to turn to Paul and say, you took money from developers, therefore you're an evil person and we can't trust anything you say. That's not really a great middle ground to start having a conversation, a nuanced conversation about something that, quite frankly, is very badly needed in the 905 region.
Yeah, and a couple of additional points make on that, and the first one is we need to get away from this. If I disagree with you, you are therefore a bad guy. I disagree with Paul Sharman. I don't necessarily think he's a bad guy. I have no reason to believe he's anything but a decent guy, according to his worldview, and that's fine. And we need to do that. I mean, we need to get better at defending our political opponents from unfair attacks, because it makes the point that, this is democracy. We're allowed to disagree. We're allowed to disagree very strongly. We're allowed to disagree fundamentally. That doesn't mean that the other guy is the enemy. And the Trumpification of politics that's what we have right now. I disagree with you, therefore I hate you. And no, let's do what we can to stop that.
I'm just going to add one final addendum onto that argument. The reason why we need to start looking at the middle ground and say, I'll meet you here and I'll concede some things to you, is because we're seeing that there are people in our political discourse who are advocating things that are just abhorrent or very much, at the very least, ill-conceived, ill-thought out, and we the general consensus, it'd be very harmful, to the extreme of outright racist, sexist, homophobic, and just terrible things to advocate from any level of politics. Those are the places that we need to stand united and say, whether we're, right or left, liberal or conservative or NDP or Green Party, on this matter, we all stand united, and you don't have a place at the table on this. If we can't look for that commonality amongst our political opponents, I'm not going to say enemies, opponents, then when the real enemies come knocking at the gates, we can't determine who they are. And that's what we're seeing. And I would go as far as say the danger is, we're seeing that danger here in Canada at the federal level. And I'll go as far as say, the Conservative Party, there are good, decent conservative people, but the direction that party is going with the adhering to dangerous folks in our country, ladies and gentlemen, it's a dangerous path that we're going down, and we can't stand to virtue signal or to forever move the chains and move the gates of who gets to participate in democracy. If we can't look and say, I disagree with your opinions on that matter, but this is where the real fight is. That's it.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say one final thing on the issue of political donations and funding, that I think there's a huge problem with the political donation system that we have at the moment at every level. The banning of corporate donations I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but to reiterate a point, this is really what's going on here. The people see a donation from somebody and view that as wrong. And there's the point to be made that yes, that is all kinds of problematic. Not necessarily illegal though. That's the difference. The point that we should be taking on, rather than trying to smear politicians who we don't like with innuendo, is how do we fix it? And really, the only way you can truly fix political donations is by not having them at all. If you say that the political donation limit is $100, then the person who gives $100 is now your biggest donor, and they will get just as much attention as the $1,000 donor used to get. The cost of political influence is remarkably cheap in Ontario. I mean, it went up to about $3,000 recently, but it used to be just $1,200 at every level. There is an alternative way to do this, and that is to not let candidates raise money and not to have this very inefficient and often unfair kind of contest for donor dollars, which is a big con anyway, because at provincial and federal level, those dollars are actually underwritten to about 2/3 extent by taxpayers, and to basically they're trying to get people enthusiastic in a thing that people aren't enthusiastic in, to pay for leaflets that no one wants to receive, lawn signs that no one wants to put on their lawn. It's a crazy thing. Like, why don't we just pay out of the taxpayer's pocket to make sure every candidate's information is delivered to every home, so that every person can look at a booklet with all the candidates in, where they get to say, I'm John Smith, this is what I'm running on, and they don't have to beg, borrow and steal, or they don't have to ask for money from developers or developers' wives or developers' secretaries or the guy who runs the shop downtown or Mrs. Smith at number 12.
Right.
But they all get their chance to get their words across. Wouldn't that actually make more sense?
And on that note, let's take a break, and we'll be back with more right after this. And we're back. This time to look at the other B word in the 905, Brampton. Or maybe I should say Brown, more specifically Patrick Brown, because as he's the guy who never leaves the headlines.
No, and the headline that he's got most recently, and it's probably got most people's attention, is a seeming kind of vindication of the accusation that he was using Brampton staff to run his campaign. The Integrity Commissioner said there was no no reasonable grounds that he paid city staff to work on his leadership campaign. And you say, Patrick Brown in the clear, everything's done, everything's clear. No, not really. This was just one. Sorry, I'm just looking at a picture of him. Boy, is that a bad jacket he's wearing. That man has strange fashion sense. That's not a reason to criticize him. It's good for him. The rebel media had directed that particular accusation at him, and it hasn't stuck. We were discussing before we came on. The one thing we certainly do know is that paid staff do work on political cameras.
I think we should just clarify, like the city. So the accusation was, when his Conservative Party leadership bid, he had city staff who were clearly loyal to him, working on his campaign, his leadership campaign. Now the question was whether or not they were being paid by the city of Brampton as they were working on the campaign. As it turns out, no, they weren't. They were on a vacation leave. It's a pretty horrible vacation, if you ask me. But they were on vacation, so they were not being paid by the city, or on a leave of absence, and they were working on his campaign for the time being. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, this happens all the time in politics. Like, this is when you and I have worked in politics a long time, in party politics, and this is what happens: is they say, if you like what they bring in, the pros, right? The pros from Toronto, the pros from Ottawa, and this is, every party does this. I've never met one party that does not organize themselves this way. But you'll have people, communications experts who are party loyalists, clearly, who work in some minister's office or an MP or MPP's office. They are well known as, they know their stuff when it comes to communication or policy or just campaigning in general. We're going to send you out to so-and-so's campaign to help them out, or you're going to go help your boss get reelected. It's typically how it works. Now, they are not being paid by Ottawa or by Toronto, like by Queen's Park or by Parliament when they're shipped out to the various ridings. They are on vacation. They take a vacation, and they're told, you go, we'll tell you to go there. And they get, some volunteer puts them up in their house for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however long the campaign period takes. That's what, I mean, Patrick Brown is a political animal. I don't know if he knows how to do anything else other than politicking. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he says, this is what we do. And I think it comes down to a little bit of hypocrisy in terms of the Conservative Party at their leadership level for saying, oh no, we're going to kick him out of the race because he's using questionable ethics. So it's like, come on, like,
you all know how it works. You know how it works. You know this is what's done. And to be fair to those, I mean, it's one of those silly situations where everybody remembers watching The West Wing, because Jebediah Bartlett or whatever in The West Wing would never do a bad thing. He would physically not take a phone call in the White House that was a political phone call. He would leave the building to take that call. And we have that kind of, you take one hat off and put another hat on, and it's kind of a mental state of being, if you like. It's like, okay, now I'm working as a partisan, whereas 5 minutes ago I was a neutral government employee.
Right.
And that's possible. I mean, that is kind of possible, and they are not getting paid by the taxpayer when they do that. And the other thing to bear in mind is that a lot of the political staff who are public servants on the taxpayer dime, when their party loses, they lose their job. They are fired immediately. They have no job security. They have nothing. They are completely at the whim. They're probably the most unprotected workers in the country. Political staffers. They have absolutely no sort of employment rights in many ways. And so it's like slightly fair. It's like, well, they should be, for goodness sake, let them work to try and keep their jobs, because they're going to be on the pogey in a few hours. So, and I guess that's kind of the same at city hall level too. I mean, certainly with some, your job might not go away, but you might end up with a very different job after an election if your boss loses. Yeah, all of which does not get Patrick Brown remotely off the hook for doing what he's now done, which is kind of use this. Oh, it's all just a conspiracy to get me, to shut down an investigation into of money spent into the proposals to try and get a university built in Brampton. So there's a whole thing that's been running for a good while about that university, which was a huge part of Patrick Brown's kind of election campaign back in 2018. Is we're going to bring a university to Brampton, and we did all these preliminary studies, and we spent a whole lot of money to find out that no one's putting a university in Brampton anytime soon, which seems to be a completely reasonable thing for an integrity commissioner to look at, and the integrity commissioner's already done a lot of work. But now Patrick Brown, feeling that he's been vindicated in one thing, got his buddies to basically vote that investigation out of existence and say, well, it's just all more political gamesmanship or whatever. And you can go through item after item in Brampton's recent history and see this pattern of genuinely dubious behaviour on the behalf of Patrick Brown, things that are not normal for a mayor to do, of employing people that are not neutral in the usual way of city employees, but are brought in from outside who have political connections. There's a whole lot going on, so we shouldn't let this particular thing that was brought by rebel media, that was kind of BS, in which the Conservatives used as a way to get him out of a race they didn't want him to be in, from the more ongoing problems with Patrick Brown's mayoralty in Brampton.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I can't really add too much to that. It is my concern will be after this municipal election, because it does appear that Patrick Brown's going to walk back into office as mayor of Brampton. Depending on how the makeup of that council works, I can picture this pseudo scandal. I call it pseudo because it's still unfolding, quietly just going away. It's
we should point out, just what we're on the subject, just before we move on, but that the investigation into the university consulting and advocacy thing has already delivered a preliminary report, an interim draft report, and that interim draft report found serious irregularities. So they're cancelling a report that's already been paid for which the work has already been done, that's already found, interim evidence of problematic behaviour, and they're cancelling that now to say, oh, yes, this is all political nonsense. No, I mean, yes, what's happening is now's a good time to bury this when you've just been vindicated on another front, and if that is allowed to pass, that's a real shame. Like I say, it seems I don't understand Brampton. I don't understand Brampton politics at all, but judging by the polls, Patrick Brown's likely to win an easy victory there. And fair enough, that's democracy, I guess.
Well, you get what you vote for.
But at some point, things, there are too many things coming up too often which are too credible, which are very different from, oh, hey, look, someone donated to someone, that, ask serious questions about the leadership at Brampton City Hall.
Right. Well, I think on that note, we should call it a night, call it an episode, put this one in the can, put it to rest. Thanks very much, everyone, for listening. We'll catch you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll catch you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.